Like there's something about these toys when we were a kid that anything like me, like I loved them. I was actually, I was talking to a friend a few minutes ago, and I was like, I had action figures growing up. Anybody else have action figures? Like every Batman, like, I mean, I had all the Batmans that came out, and like the real Batmans, like Michael Keaton, you know what I'm talking about? Like that sort of thing. I had all of that as a kid. I used to, like, we would ask, or I would ask for like Christmas time, especially for like a specific toy, and he was always the thing. I never just asked for one toy. I would ask for a toy, and then it was a massive sort of list of things. Anybody else, you know what I'm talking about? Like you had the thing that you wanted, and then you also had all of the other things that you wanted. And it just kind of became this thing of like, no matter how much I had, there was always more that I wanted. Now, I'll never forget though, there was a time in our lives where my mom was really successful. She was an entrepreneur when I was really young. We used to travel all over the country. I love telling this story. We had this like motor home, and she would pack these like Casio keyboards underneath. We'd pack 100 of those bad boys underneath this motor home, and we'd travel all over the U.S. I'd actually been to all 49 or 48 states in the continental. Is it 48? Geography. I was in South Carolina. We'll talk about that later. And so I was in I've been all in the States by the time I was in middle school, roughly around that. We traveled all the time when I was a kid. And she'd done really, really well. And then at one point she got sick and we kind of lost the business. And so I really got like everything I wanted for a season of life. So I would get the toy that I wanted and then every other toy that I wanted. And then there was a moment, this is so interesting for me, when everything changed and everything flipped. And then one year I felt guilty for asking for the things that I wanted because we just didn't have, and I knew we didn't have enough to get some of those things. And so my list went from like the big things that I was asking for to a much like smaller list if I even asked at all for a few years. And everything in our world sort of got turned upside down. And there was something that happened inside of me. I don't know if it's anything like you or if you ever had a moment like this, but there was something in my heart that said, oh gosh, I never, ever, ever want to be in that position again. I will always have enough money to do right? And if you grew up sort of like me, or if you grew up around other people like this, you know that there's almost like these stories that happen along the way that sort of grip your heart. And specifically when it comes to resources and finances and those sort of things. I remember being in high school saying, my kids will never, ever lack. I will always have enough to get their main toy. And in high school, I was making like $3 an hour doing nothing. You know what I mean? Like it was so interesting. And for me, it was an internal sort of drive that kind of moved me forward. And a lot of people experience sort of versions of that. Like depending on what your life was like growing up, there's a part of you that just decided that you were going to be successful and you were specifically going to be successful when it came to finances. Now, I recently heard this story. I loved this. A lot of you know who this is. This is Warren Buffett. And there's a really interesting biography about Warren Buffett. It's called The Snowball. It's by Alice Schroeder. I think I said her name right, Schroeder. And there's this great story about Warren Buffett. I want you to sort of imagine this as much as you can. In 1940, he was about 10 years old, and his father, Howard, took all of their kids on these sort of big trips, and they kind of got to pick what they wanted to do. So Howard the father takes Warren on this trip, and they end up in New York City. And not just New York City, they went to the New York Stock Exchange, because when you're Warren Buffett, that's what you do at 10 years old, right? And they showed up to the stock exchange, and there's this beautiful, really interesting story where the father, Howard, and Warren are having lunch with this very wealthy man. And they're sitting there, and the lunch goes really, really well. I mean, everything goes well at lunch. He's interesting and all this sort of thing. But the way that Warren talks about this, it's what happened after lunch that would shape his life for the rest of his life, right? So what happens next is there's a man that walks around, and he described him almost as a server, and on the serving tray was a bunch of tobacco leaves just lined all over the serving tray. And for him to talk about this was so fascinating because this person walked up to the person that they were eating lunch with this sort of tray, and what they were going to do is do like a customized cigar. Right? And so Warren Buffett is sitting there, and it's not just any sort of customized cigar. This is so interesting. They bring it up to the table, and the guy that they're eating with doesn't want just any tobacco leaf. He begins to pick the specific tobacco leaves that he wanted for this specific custom cigar. And the way that Warren began to talk about this story is like, that must be the pinnacle when you don't just get a custom cigar, but you pick your own tobacco leaves in the midst of it. And he's this 10-year-old boy. And as he's telling the story, the biographer that's talking about this, Alex Schroeder, says this way, that it was in that moment that Warren Buffett would have said that he was going to reorient his life around making money so that he could experience independence and security. And that's exactly what Warren Buffett did. In fact, at one point during Warren Buffett's life, he was the richest person in the world. And you sort of begin to see this all over the place, right? And we call them these like stories of the heart, right? Ultimately, what begins to happen with people is these moments happen early on that begin to shape and shift the way we see the world, the way we think about things, the way we think about resources, the way that we think about all of it. Now, let me say right off the bat, as soon as we start talking about finances and resources and all these sorts of things, as soon as you hear a pastor start talking about this or a church, it gets wonky really quick. So let me just tell you, I've been in those talks, I've been in those churches, and I've been in those moments. We're not going to do that today. In fact, I think I'm going to equally offend everybody at some point in the room, and I'm so excited for you to email somebody other than me about your offenses. It'll be fun. Now, for the next few minutes, though, as we talk about it, what I want you to do if you're in the room and you're not a follower of Jesus is I want you to take a few minutes and hear about what Scripture teaches and what it doesn't teach about these stories that make their way into our hearts that shape the course and the direction of our lives. And if you're here and you are a follower of Jesus, what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is I hope to deconstruct some things that maybe many of us were brought up in, and then on the other side of that, begin to reconstruct what the New Testament actually teaches when it comes to the way that we live our lives, specifically when it comes to finances. Now, to do that, I want to talk about two things, and this kind of gets after the stories of our hearts that's really true of most of us in the room. When it comes to money and when it comes to our resources, there's two things that most of us are pursuing. The first thing is control, right? We wouldn't say it this way unless you're wired like me, like an Enneagram 8. You probably would say it that way. But what? Yeah. Sorry, I'm not going to make the joke about Enneagram 8s. It's great, though. Now, there's something about us that just wants control. We want to hold on. We believe that the more that we can acquire or bring in, that not only do we feel like safe, but we also feel like we have more and more control over our future. So let me tell you right off the bat, in some ways that is true. So let's just say it right out the gate. There is something about being well-resourced that changes things in your life. And that's very true, and I don't think that's bad. In fact, if you're here and you're wealthy, and most people who are wealthy probably wouldn't say they're wealthy, but if you're here and most of us would think that you're wealthy, let me tell you this. I think that's actually a noble pursuit and beautiful and powerful, and God uses that in extraordinary ways. That's a gift. But the thing that sort of lurks behind the gift is the feeling of us being able to control and being many idols in our own life, thinking that we hold more power than we actually do. Second thing is security. Now, I love talking about this because this is almost all of us in the room, right? And especially if you're married or you have a significant other in the room, you know this. Most of the time, there's one person that loves to spend all the money, and there's a person who loves the security thing, right? That no matter what dollar amount is sitting there, I want it to grow, not because I just want more control or more freedom or more independence. I want it to grow so that I can feel more secure. And in both of those instances, in the way that we try to control our future and in the way that we try to secure our future, what especially in the Western world, we're trying to do more than anything else is move into this way of self-preservation. How do I ensure that I am taken care of? How do I ensure that I can hold on tight enough to what's coming and be ready for that and make things happen for myself, right? I had a mentor one time that looked at me and I loved it because it was both so inspiring and wildly untrue. But he looked at me and he said this. He said, you control your destiny. He's like, you control your destiny. I was like, in some ways, yes. And then in some ways, I don't know about all that. And here's how you know that. Because there are some things about your future that you have impacted and shifted, and there are other things that were wildly outside of your control that you never saw coming and affected you in a very difficult way. And so ultimately, and this is for me, and we'll talk about this, follower of Jesus or not, the idea of control, solely you being able to control your future, is a little bit of a facade and a pursuit that's not always there. And the second thing is there is no amount of money that will ultimately make you fully and finally secure. And there's no amount of resourcing or pursuit of that that's going to make you fully and finally secure. Now, for the next few minutes, what I want to do is I want to talk about what Scripture teaches around this. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm going to tell you really bluntly, right? This is right up front. What we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, there's going to be a part of it where you just want to clap. Please don't do that. It'll make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, even though I'm going to be preaching when I do it. It'll be great. It'll be great. But I'll tell you, you're going to agree so heavily with that. And then I'm going to flip it in a minute, especially for all of us who are followers of Jesus. And then it's going to get a little bit harder to sort of swallow. If you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, I want to talk specifically about this new kingdom and new way of being in the world that Jesus teaches about, which is actually very different than the way that many of us who grew up in church were brought to think when it comes to our resources. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to talk specifically about one word that if you've been around church, you've heard a lot, especially from guys like me, and that's the word tithing. Tithing is an interesting thing. I was brought up in the idea that you give 10% of your income straight to the church. That's what we did. And actually, usually in the services that I was a part of, there would be like a tithing moment, which was always fun. The pastor would get up. And there was like 4 or 5 verses that they would always use almost every time to talk about tithing. And they would get up and they would talk about this. And it would be like, we're going to do this together. Everybody gets really excited. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. They would get a little bit less excited than my Pentecostal friends, but we'll talk about that later. And so we would do this whole thing. And they would get really excited, and here we would go. Like we would have these moments of tithing, and then we would pass the plate. Anybody ever been in a service where they just pass the plate, and then there was always the guy, you're like, I feel like you took something out. I don't know. Like there's a little bit of that. And at our church, we were like, that's okay. We're good with that. That's actually part of the thing. And so we loved you pass the plate, and I would sit there with my mom. Now I'll tell you, the first time my mom ever gave me money, she gave me $10, and she gave it to me in ones so that I could tithe, so that I could tithe. And I did. I remember taking that to children's church in my little King James Bible that I didn't understand, but I did it anyway. It had pretty pictures. I opened my Bible up. I put my $1 in the thing, and then I walked away. But often what happens with tithing, and we'll just say this, and this is kind of the fun part for me, people like me like to use an Old Testament principle to talk about what it means to give. And the Old Testament is great, and it's valid, and it's beautiful, and there's a lot that we pull from it. But there's about 613 laws and customs that many of which we kind of pull away because you eat bacon, and you pull a lot of those things away, and we don't actually lean into those things, and tithing sort of falls into that camp. And so what happens for a lot of people, is they grow up around tithing, or they hear people talk about tithing or 10% of their income and all this sort of thing. And then they read the rest of the Bible. And then they get in the New Testament, or they read certain passages and they begin to understand like the New Covenant, Old Covenant, all this sorts of thing. And then they just go, oh, well, the Bible doesn't actually say that, or that was for them. And so what they go is, well, if the Bible says that and the tithing thing, then sort of throw it all out. But we have to understand what tithing actually was, right? It was actually a tax to the temple in the Old Testament way. And we actually find it over and over and over and over and over again as a pattern for giving throughout the Old Testament. It happens a lot, right? And one of my favorite passages that talks about tithing is an area of the Bible called Malachi. Here's what it says. I love reading this. It's all fun. And we used to read this in our church every time we get ready to give. It says, bring the whole tithe, or the whole 10%, into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. This is sort of like God talking in the storehouse thing. And this is one of the only times in the Bible that you see this at all. He says, test me in this, which is so fascinating because most of us are brought up to believe you don't ever test God, you don't do that at all. But in this particular area, God, look at this group of people going, but test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. And usually when I grew up in, the pastor would like say that, and then the organ come in, everybody gets really excited, which I love, and we're excited, And the reason that we were excited, and don't miss this, is because deep down underneath all of that giving was that I'm going to give to get something back from God. And we get so excited about the open of the storehouse because can you open up the garage and let a little woohoo drive out? And that's better than my Dodge Caravan was. I'll tell you that, Maybe it's that. Maybe it's something that I really, really, really wanted. And if I give this, then of course God's gonna do the thing that I want God to do. And it becomes a manipulative act. And what happens, it becomes this Old Testament law around tithing that gets turned into a minimum amount of giving so that you can get God to do whatever it is that you want God to do. The problem with that is that it's just a crappy way to read the Bible. Because what happens next is so much more disturbing. We're comfortable with tithing if you're comfortable with tithing, right? Tithing is like 10%. Like if you look at 10% of your income every dollar, like some of you, like you've been doing that for a long time and you're just comfortable in that. And I think the tithe matters, and we're gonna talk about that, but it's wildly incomplete when you put it against a New Testament teaching around generosity. Because Jesus comes into the world and he begins to speak to different types of people. He's speaking to Jewish people who would have a large background on all of these sorts of things. Jewish people at the time who were like, they're called the Pharisees. And these are people who like kept all the laws, they did everything right, they're checking all the boxes. Jesus would poke at them because their heart wasn't in the right place. And you have this group of people that would be giving like a percentage or a tithe and it's all good and we feel good and look what we're doing and everything's right with God. And then it wasn't. And then we get this really weird passage with Jesus going to the temple. And I love this. Here's what it says. This is Jesus kind of giving this like, really sort of he's going to give a parable of what happens. But I want you to watch what Jesus says. It says, Jesus sits down opposite the place where the offerings were put. And he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Now I want you to picture this as much as you can. This is Jesus, not white Jesus with a sash and gray hair, but this is like Jesus in the Arabic world and sort of the ancient sort of thing. And he pulls up a chair and he's watching these people give money, which is like real awkward. And he's watching them just put in this sort of thing. Now, here's why this happened. We like to think about giving as 100% private, and nobody really knows, and nobody really knows what you make, and nobody really knows what you give, and all that sort of things. But in this culture, giving was both private and also not, and actually not just private, you know what I mean? And so these people would come and they would give, and Jesus actually pulls up a chair, and he sits down next to them. And he says, many rich people threw large amounts into whatever this thing was that was collecting. And you sort of just picture Jesus like watching it happen, like, Bob walks through, Bob gives whatever Bob gives, and the next person walks through, and Jacob's giving whatever Jacob's giving, and then he's sitting there, and his closest followers around him. And then what happens next is a poor widow came. I love this. And she puts 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Now, in the Greek here, what it actually means is a few cents, right? It doesn't mean a lot of money. It's just a little bit of what she has. And what happens in this culture when all these people are given, and they're given in some ways out of obligation because of the percentage that they committed to and all these sorts of things. Jesus sits there and watches them come by one after the other, one after the other. Then he calls his disciples over to him and he says this, he calls them all over. And he says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all the others. Kind of sits there, and I imagine his disciples just kind of look around like, is he okay? He ate some bad chicken, you know what I mean? Like maybe he's not okay. And they're all kind of watching, and I feel like he probably just dropped the mic and just kind of sat there, and the next people kind of came in, and the widow sort of leaves. And I feel like he picks them back up, he's like, ugh, no, this is what I mean. They all gave out of their wealth, or in the original language here, their abundance. They all gave out of their comfort. They all gave out of the thing that just felt okay. But she, out of her poverty, put in everything and all she had to live on. Now, here's the part that I love, and this is just me. What I was brought up in to think about when it came to tithing is that then Jesus would have gone, that was so sweet. Oh, I just love that old lady. She's so sweet. I'm going to then go give her more money because she was poor. Look, she gave everything, so let me just go give her more. Because obviously the reason that she gave was to get. But this is where it ends. Jesus doesn't get up and go, well, let me just go do da-da-da-da. Or let me just hold this woman up as an example, and then now because she's the example, I'm going to go fix all of her problems, and she's now rich like everybody else. Don't miss this. And this is the power of this passage. Is because Jesus was drawing out of his disciples not how much she gave, but in her confidence that she was going to be taken care of either way. You don't give all you have just as like a stupid sort of like, oh, and it's just going to all work out. She gave out of the confidence that she had that her heavenly Father saw her exactly where she was. She gave in faith. And this is what Jesus does over and over and over in the New Testament. He talks about your time, and he goes, hey, when it comes to your time, many of you, you work and you work and you work and you work and you never stop working, you never stop working, and it's not about how much you work. It's about when it comes to the spiritual discipline of taking time off and Sabbath and that sort of thing, it's about slicing things off and creating space and room to know that the God of the universe can take care of even that. And when it comes to your resources and finances, everybody wants to get caught up in how much percentage, and we'll talk about it in a second. I don't think it's bad, but I'm going like, if you're giving a percentage so that you can get something from God, that's not it. It's that you're slicing off a section of things that make you feel in control and feel secure and going into God open-handed and say, look, here's all of me, and I trust you to do what only you can do. And so if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, right, the question isn't about how much money you have. Wealth is a gift. We also see in the New Testament that poverty in some cases can be a gift for some people, that choosing not to have a lot is also a gift, and that God can work through extraordinary things. The deeper question that Jesus continues to bring up and bring out of people is who takes care of you, and ultimately whose hands are you in? And it doesn't matter how much is in your bank account. The deeper question, whether you give $500 million this year or the widow's mite, is whose hand are you in, and who do you trust? Where does your control and security come from, and where does it crumble beneath? Does it crumble beneath the idea that Jesus is actually your provider? And if you're a follower of Jesus, that's one of the foundational things of Christianity. Throughout the Old Testament, it's not just a tithe. It's that you see these stories of the Israelites showing up and food coming. And I think it's so fascinating because God just provided daily for his people. And so my question for you, no matter what you think about what security and control actually look like or what that number is, if you're a follower of Jesus, this is one of the hardest questions to answer honestly, but it's this. What would God have to do for you to trust him fully with your security and your future? What would God have to do for you to trust him fully with your security and your future? Ready? Now look at me just for a second. And if any of your answers was anything other than the death and resurrection of his son, Jesus Christ, you do not understand the depth of what God is calling from you when it comes to faith in your finances. Jesus came into the world and sacrificed everything on your behalf, and he rose from the grave and he conquered all of those things, and that is where we place our trust and our faith and our hope. And Jesus even teaches about this. I love it. Jesus teaches to his disciples, and he's talking about, look, you got the sparrows flying around. He gives this really great illustration, and then they fall. And do you not know that your heavenly Father knows when they fall? There's this beautiful illustration. And I love it because sparrows were like the chicken McNuggets of their time, right? We were talking about like if chickens fell out of the sky, that's about how much we value the sparrows. And Jesus is going, look, if God knows even that, do you not think that God also knows what you need? Where have you placed your trust for your provision? And it has nothing to do with how much you currently have or how much you feel like you currently lack. And everything to do with you going, God, whose is this and whose hand am I in? Then this guy named Paul comes, and Paul starts talking about what it looks like to then take that principle and then leverage it for our lives and what it means. He's writing to this group in an area of the world called Corinth, and he's already written to them about generosity. So this is the second time he had to circle back, right? And if you have kids, you get that. Usually it's the second, third, 11th, or 17th time that you end up saying it and they get it, right? Go upstairs and stop hitting your sister. Like there's a little bit of that, and by 17, then you're there, right? And so Paul starts writing, this is the second time he begins to write, and he's writing about sowing and reaping. And he's not writing about sowing and reaping on behalf of you. He's writing about sowing and reaping, about what happens to your heart and your faith and your life. And here's what he says. He says, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, or that you have made a plan to give. Not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Now look, I saw the Sarah McLachlan PETA commercial too. I get it. There's a little bit of that just draws you in at times. And we're gonna talk about that. I don't think that's bad. But I think it's incomplete when you only give in a moment that you feel it. Because what happens over the course of our lives, so don't miss this, is that we sow into the world. And then we also reap. Now, most of us in the room aren't farmers, I don't think, unless you're from Plain City, maybe, right? Where are my Plain City people at? Y'all thought that was less funny than I did. That's okay, that's okay. I love it. No, but you get it, sowing and reaping is a thing that you sort of internally get, but spiritually, it's kind of like a distant sort of thing that we rarely ever talk about. And then you get the part that's really uncomfortable to talk about, especially if you're practical and you like practical faith stuff like me, right? This is the hard part that I don't like to talk about because I grew up in it being manipulated. But here's what Paul says next. He says, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things and at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Now this is what I want to camp on for a second, right? Having all that you need. Isn't that what actual wealth is? Don't miss this. Not a number, not something that you drive, not something that you're the luxury thing, or the things that you don't have, right? Wealth is knowing that you are always taken care of. And so Paul begins to wrap all of this up, not just into sowing and reaping and what you give in, sort of you get out, that sort of thing. Going, God actually makes himself supernaturally present in moments where we generously sow and trust him in our lives. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean you get everything you want or everything all of a sudden magically happened, because Jesus didn't, at least that we know, solve everything for the widow. But the promise that is kind of nestled into this passage that Paul is talking about is that you will have everything that you need for the calling that God has placed in your life when it comes to every good work that he's placed you on earth to do. And then he says this, as it is written, they have freely scattered, I love this, their gifts to the poor. Their righteousness endures forever. That then collectively, as they sow and they're open-handed, and then God gets involved supernaturally in all of these sorts of things, then they begin to make the kind of difference in the world that God placed them there. Paul goes on, he says it this way. He says, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. That the God of the universe will expand in your heart and your soul and your life the capacity to live the way that he's called you to live. And you will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God. Meaning that those who look on at this cycle of generosity will have no other thing to do but say, wow. Quote, I wish I'd have pulled it. I wish I had it. It was in the mid-1600s, and in this small community, there was a Christian group of people who had gotten this principle, and God had blessed them in extraordinary ways, and they're just continually being righteous in their community, and they're continuing doing amazing things. And they literally held a town hall meeting, and they gather these people together, and somebody steps up and go, what is happening? And the response is only, well, it's just them. Those Christians. And the community was being changed based off of their generosity, and then their lives were being shaped and shifted in the way that God got involved in all of it. Now, all of that sounds really good. Until you get to the hardest part of our heart, the thing that I think we have to uproot the most, and that's this idea. Are you a person who views yourself as an owner of the things that you possess? Do you own the things that God gave to you? Do you view the things that you have as mine? I'll give you a great example of this. My son is 5. At some point, or probably when he turns 7 or 8, I'll start asking if I can tell these stories. But for now, we'll just keep it in here, if that's okay. And a few months back, he was like, "Daddy, I want my bat." And I was like, "Sure, you can have this bat that I gave you, you know? You guys, my bat. I want to go swing it in my room." I was like, "Nope, can't go swing it in your room, buddy. Why not? Because you have a sister, and we know what happens. Like, it's just not good. You know what I mean? Like, we've all heard of the stories. But it's mine." I'm like, "Well, I gave it to you." No, it's mine, Daddy, and it's my room. I'll let you share it with your sister, so I'd love for you to tell her that and watch what happens. You know what I mean? Like, so we had this thing, so we go upstairs, and I kind of follow him up there. "This is my room. This is my bed. I'm going to do what I want because it is mine. It's mine, it's mine, it's mine, it's mine." And he's 5. And finally I was like, "Well, it's kind of mine." You ever had one of these moments with your kids? Like, no. Like, I remember going to Dick's Sporting Goods, and I remember thinking, why does a 5-year-old baseball bat cost $73? You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand that. You know, I don't get it. I remember pulling out my debit card and going, "You know how much Chick-fil-A I could buy with what I'm spending for this baseball bat?" You know what I mean? I remember sitting there going, "I don't know, you know." And I was like, it's mine. And then he's really smart. He goes, "Do we rent our apartment?" I was like, "You need to be quiet, child." You know what I mean? Like, you need to be quiet. Kidding. Mine, 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 mine. And everything in me wants to both say, "I'm so glad that you're enjoying it. And I gave it to you. But it's mine." Now, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm going to let you off the hook right now. This is a reason not to become a follower of Jesus. Because followers of Jesus, don't miss this, are required to view everything that they have not as an owner, but as a steward. And not only that, are you ready? This is all so fun. This is fun. Ryan.steigel@nuvochurch.org. That's who you email. I'm just kidding. I love making that joke. And everybody's like, "Wait, and your name is Patrick.Holden, right?" There it is. Yeah, anyway. And not only are you a steward, but it is a temporary stewardship. And don't miss this. I wish I could convince every person that's a follower of Jesus of this, because non-Christians would like you so much better. Ready? Everything you have is something that God has given you for a season. You know how you know that? Because one day you will not be here, and all of your stuff will be. I heard somebody say this the other day. I love this. My friend Josh Howerton, I quoted him a few weeks ago. I love that he said this. Do we have any golfers in the room? Where are my golfers at? Do we have any golfers? I love this. He said this. He says, "One day you're going to die and someone else is going to play better than you with your clubs." And I was like, it's like, have you seen me play? I don't know. Have you watched that? There will be a day where your car is in the impound. There will be a day where your home isn't yours. There will be a day where all of your stuff is just cleaned out by your kids and they're slightly mad that they got to clean it all out. You know what I mean? All the money you ever make and all the resources that you accumulate be yours for a season, but not forever. Tell you this, if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm telling you, I think you should apply this. I really wish you would become a follower of Jesus. I think it'll change your life. But if you're not, this is but for those of you who are followers of Jesus, I'm telling you, if you think of your stuff as an owner, you will miss out on the beauty and the power and the freedom that comes with seeing all of your resources. Your heavenly Father looks at you and says, "I'm so glad I spent $75 for you to have that bat. Look what you get to enjoy with that. And look what you get to go do with that. And I'm so, so, so glad. I'm so, so glad that you were able to have that thing, that you had the intellect to get that job, and that you had the connections of people that moved you through wherever you were, and that you had people around you that believed in you, and you had people that leaned into your life, you had people that gave to you when you were undeserving of those gifts, and all of it that came to you, it came to your open hands for you then to take and move to someone else. You're a follower of Jesus, right? And this is cheesy. I hate that things rhyme or that they, whatever, alliterate. I don't know. I'm not sure what this is actually. But God's plan for you is for you to have a plan when it comes to the things that he's given you to steward. And you could go through the 70, 80, 90 years of your life without a plan. And you can look back and go, what did I do with it? Like I did that this week. Chick-fil-A that much, you know what I mean? Like, what did I do with it? Or you can get, I love dance at this the other night in the dinner party. We all have like savings goals, but what is it like to have like a giving goal for our life? Because you were a steward of the resources that God gave you. So I want to talk about that plan, and it's something that was shared with me when I was in high school. My mom brought me up this way, to believe this way and see the world this way before I saw it alliterated with all the P's. But I read a book, I think it was in high school, by a guy named Andy Stanley, who's a pastor, and it's called Fields of Gold. If you've never read it, it's old. I think it might be hard to find anymore, but it's a great book, and he talks about a plan, and I love this. Here's what he says. We'll go to the P's if we can, Grant. Here's what he says. The first thing is this. He said, as followers of Jesus, you have to figure out what your priority is when it comes to giving, right? Here's what I'll tell you, right? You can give after everything comes in, at the very end of it, and see what you have left. A lot of people do that. Like, what's my week been like or my month like? And then that's what we'll be generous with. You and I both know that when you do that, it's always less, and you always just waste. There's a part of you that just wastes. Same sort of thing with, and we'll talk about this later on, I'm sure, at some point. This is the same thing with, like, your rest. I love this. Ryan talked to me about this years ago, and I still struggle with this, but you can work all week and then go, oh, now I got to crash and rest. Or you can view your week going, I'm going to start by resting and abiding in God, and then I'm going to move through the rest of my week. And your whole week changes when you see it that way. Same is true about giving. So I would say this. When it comes to your financial resources as a follower of Jesus, I think you should prioritize giving first, and then everything comes second, right? The second thing is this, percentage giving. Now, I dogged the tithe, and I know I did for a little bit. That doesn't mean that I don't think you should tithe. I just think that when it comes to giving, that's kind of like, for followers of Jesus, a baseline. Like that's, the way that the New Testament upends it is going, you give 10%, great, but what about like all the generosity? What about all that you have? When Jesus upends this, he doesn't talk about like pieces of it. He talks about the fullness of it, and he talks about full sacrifice. Now, I don't think everybody has to sell everything they own and go live in a little tent and go do that. That's not what I'm saying. I don't believe that. Some people are called to extreme versions of that kind of generosity, but most of us are just called to have a plan and figure out what that is. But I'll tell you this, for most people, not all people, but for most people that live in Western America, especially like middle-class suburbs sort of thing, for most, not all, but for most people, 10% is a baseline if you actually prioritize it and reordered your life around it. It's not that I don't think you should tithe, but I will say this. If you're doing this for the first time, I think your plan should involve a percentage, whatever that percentage is. I don't think you should get wrapped up. Is it 10 or 12 or 15 or 3 or 6? Pick a percentage and lean into that and invite God into it. And the third thing is this, and this is something that Andy talks about, and I think was so beautiful. I never heard it quite put this way. Priority, percentage, then progressive. This is where Dan was talking about like your life-giving goal, but I would also say like the other part of this is like, what does it look like to progressively give throughout the course of your life? Andy talks about this. It changed my life forever. He said, every year we try to give a little bit more than we did last year. A little bit more. Progressively giving a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And by the end of your life, there's just something about that. And what he said, and I love this, we'll talk about this in a second, that God gets involved in that kind of giving in miraculous ways. I believe that he does. And it's beautiful. And then the last one is the one that a lot of us kind of drift towards, and that's like feeling prompted to give. I made a joke earlier about, the thing about, was the PETA commercial with Sarah McLachlan's song, whatever that is. Now, I make a joke about it, but I would also go, you will feel spontaneous giving pop up for you. And I think that's good. But when it does pop up for you, and don't miss this, I think it should be in addition to the way that you've already reordered your life around being a generous person. And then I think you should stretch yourself. There should be times where you experience this prompting or spontaneous sort of giving sort of thing, and then it move you beyond kind of what you've done before. Now, I'm going to share one last thing that I kind of went back and forth on, and I kind of struggled if I was going to share it because I'm always a little bit nervous about this kind of thing, but truthfully, I think this is probably important for most of us. The part about this that at least our style of churches struggle with is that God actually does supernaturally get involved in these things. And I don't think it means that you're going to get everything that you want. I don't. But I've also there's been moments in my life that are so unexplainable because I've invited God to be a part of something that I've otherwise closed him off towards in the past. I'll give you a really easy example. This is a recent one. We were starting our church. We had $5,000 in the bank account. Some of you heard me this. And the way that we got $5,000 is because the first person I asked wasn't a financial ask. It was actually an ask to say, hey, could we live in your place while you were living in Florida? And they said, you know what? How many kids do you have? I'm just going to give you $5,000. You go figure it out. That's what they did. I was like, you know what? I totally get it. That's great. So we put that in the bank. And there was a person who said, you know what? I really want to give. We're kind of strapped right now because our house has been on the market for almost 2 years at that point. And he said, but I'll tell you this, we believe in what you're doing, and we're gonna give to it, and whatever we make off of the house whenever it sells, we're gonna give. And it had been on the market for almost 2 years. So you know what I did? I got in my little Honda Accord and I drove to that house. And I remember getting to the house and I said, God, I don't understand real estate at all, but I know that you can orchestrate things and that things can happen miraculously. The house sold 2 days later. And he gave the largest check that we had ever been given at that point to the church, which was the second one. So yeah, again, but still, it was big. And I remember thinking that was incredible. Some of you know the story about my mom having cancer, and we went from like having everything to not having, ooh, this is a stool, having everything to not having everything. The stuff that I don't probably share very often. There's also times where we weren't sure like how we're gonna eat or like, I mean, we always had food, but like there were bits of that. And I would sit there in the church service. My mom would give to the church, and I would get so angry, because it wasn't that she was prioritizing it over me. It was just that she was prioritizing it over SpaghettiOs, and I wanted something that wasn't SpaghettiOs for a minute. You know what I mean? And I'll never forget. I remember the first time she did it, and I remember she tithed. And what she made, it was so little. And we got home, and there was a check for 10 times that amount of money at our house, like randomly. And I went, I don't know how that works. And maybe that's a coincidence. You're smart people. You probably figure out how that works, and that was a coincidence, and somebody figured it out. It was another time in my life where I was given a car, and not too long after I was given the car in college, I got rear-ended, and the battery moved to the front of it. And so me and Emily were sitting in the car. We were just sitting there. I promise we were dating, though, but it was great. And we were sitting in this car, and the battery had moved forward, and it caught on fire. This car that I had been given caught on fire, and it just, I mean, it was gone. We called the campus safety patrol people, which was hilarious watching them try to put out this fire with whatever water they're doing. It was like, I think we should call the fire department. I don't know, you know? And they showed up, and I was like, I don't have a car to go to work. I don't have a car to take Emily out to Applebee's with, because that's what our dates consisted of, half-price appetizers at 10 p.m. And I remember thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do. And somebody came up to me and they said this. I'll never forget. They said, you should pray specifically for what you want, because I think you need to be reminded that God sees you and he knows your need. And be specific. I kid you not. I prayed the next day, God, I would love a green 4Runner. Now, I had envisioned a new one. 3 days later, we got a call from a woman. She goes, I don't know why I'm supposed to do this. I didn't tell anybody. I'm supposed to give you this, and it was a green 4Runner. It was a stick shift, so it was interesting watching me drive it, but and it wasn't that I got a green 4Runner. It was that I was being reminded that God cares about those things and that he takes care of his children. I have a lot of stories like that. And it's not because I'm just some generous, amazing philanthropist giver. I'm not. But I came up believing that when we invite God into those things, God shows himself tangibly in those things. I believe this. I don't know that you're going to get the things that you want or that you'll get a green Ford. That's why I hesitate to tell you. I don't think it's that. But I know that God is going to remind you of the things that you need to be reminded of so that you know that he's going to take care of you. Some of you in the room, you ready? Some of you have no idea, but God's plan for you is to be that anonymous giver for somebody else so that they can see and sense and experience the power and the presence of God in unique ways. You have no idea how God's orchestrating your day even today to experience those things. So, having said all that, I want you to make a plan if you're a follower of Jesus. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, what I want you to do is I want you to watch our church long enough to see what happens when a group of people do make a plan to give and the power that comes on the other side of it. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pull it under your seat for a second, if you would. Go ahead and go under your seat. There's a little card. We've talked about this already. If you missed last week, I at least want to explain to you what's going on. Everybody told us that this is a series you do at year 2, but welcome to Nuvo. We're 9 weeks in. So I'll tell you what we're going to do. For the next couple of weeks, up until December 5th, what we're going to do is I'm challenging you to pray about what God would have you to give to this place in particular. And some of you are extraordinarily generous, and God's moving in your heart, moving in your life, and all those things are really fantastic and beautiful. Some of you are giving here, some of you are tithing here already, and all those things are great. But here's what I'm going to tell you, right? If you're here and you're a follower of Jesus and you're already giving, I'm going to ask you to go, God, what would you have me to do in this next year? And actually ask him the question and listen. What is it that he wants you to do? And for some of you, you haven't taken the generosity journey yet. You've been a follower of Jesus for a long time, but you actually haven't leaned into that yet. And so I want you to lean into it. I want you to kind of experience it. I want to tell you what we're going to be doing, right? The first thing that I want to tell you that we're going to be doing is specifically at our church. There's 3 things we're focusing on over the course of the next year. We talked about this last week. You can see this online. If we can go to the Nuvo site, we're working to specifically focus on our children's ministry. We're really working on a digital front door, and you heard me talk about an opportunity fund so that we're ready for whatever opportunities God has for us in the city. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to really engage with us in that, specifically locally at Nuvo. The second thing we're going to do, and I'll tell you, it excites me and it scares me as well because of what it means for us, is we're also going to support another church plant that launched about a week before we did. So we're younger than them by about 6.5 days. But I'll tell you, Carlos is an extraordinary leader. It's an incredible church. They're in Miami, Florida. He and his family have gone there. They're investing in it, very similar style church with mission. We're going to help support them. Let me say, together, we're going to help support another church plant, even in this infant sort of stage of where we're at. I'm going to challenge you to give so that we can do those sorts of things. And the last thing is this: we have this sort of national reach and we have a global reach. And the global reach for us is very focused specifically on young women who are in sex trafficking, right? That's what we're focusing on. And so I talked about this last week. I'd love for you, if you didn't catch all of it, to go watch at least the ending portion of last week where I kind of unpacked this more. But essentially what they're doing is they're helping young women who are in this get out of it, and they're crafting spaces for them to have jobs to move forward from there. And I want you to partner with us to do those things, right? So your card, here's what we're going to do. Let's pull up that pledge card one more time. On December 5th, right, I want you to take a few weeks to think and pray about what God would have you to do with us as we move forward together. Now, I love this. I pointed this out last week. There's these little black boxes. Let me tell you about these black boxes. Everybody look at these little black boxes that everybody's a little nervous that we put on the card, including me, but let's just look at them for a second. Black boxes have numbers on them. I care, but I'm not that interested in what the numbers are for you. What I'm interested in is for you going, I gravitated towards one of those boxes. What would it be like if God were to increase or get involved in or help me to see my life differently so that I can move into one of the other boxes, right? That's the prayer that I want you to be praying. There's a comfort box that you have, which is fantastic. I love it, and many of you may go there. But there's some of you that I think God is going to stretch your faith to engage in that next box. And I want you to pray about that and actually pray about it. So I'll tell you, my wife Emily and I thought we knew what we were going to do. We were driving around the other night. I was like, are we going to do that? I was like, well, we should think about it. We started talking about it. We both came up with the same number, which was kind of fun. And then we go, is that the right number? And as a family, I'll tell you, we're still praying about it. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I'm trying to go, how is God stretching us for that other box? I want you to think about that too. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back December 5th. On December 5th, I hope you come back on December 5th. Don't skip December 5th, right? But come back December 5th. It's Christmas. Come on, you got to come. December 5th, what we're going to do is together we're going to take these cards, right? I'm not going to have you do anything weird with it, but together we're going to kind of say, hey, we're putting a stake in the ground together for the church that we're building together, right? And that involves the way that you are generous and the way that you give and the way that you're part of this place, right? So that's what we're going to do. Now, today what we're going to do is I want you to take this card with you. Some of you took it last week, but you can take it with you again. Take the card with you. Put it somewhere that you can see it and that you kind of have access to it, that you can process it through the week. And as you do that, right, I'd love for you to be communicating if you're married or with your spouse or significant other what it's going to be, or if you're not, really processing what that's going to be for you. And then December 5th, we're all going to come back, and I promise you're not going to come on stage. You're not going to have to lay it in any sort of fire or anything like that, I promise. We're going to say together, this is what we're going to do, and then we're going to put it in a place together. So that's what we're going to do. Now, apparently the preacher went really long, really long today. I hate that guy. So what we're going to do today is we're going to wrap up right here. I want to pray for us, and I want to pray for you. And I want to pray for you this week as you sort of process this. And then I pray that God continues to stretch your faith, specifically what it looks like to make a plan for giving. So let me pray for us, and then we'll wrap up from here. Father, thank you so much for what you're doing in the life of our church. Thank you for the ways that you're expanding our faith. For many of us, being generous like this is a first-time thing when it comes to planned giving. And so, Father, I pray that this week you would help us to lean into that and help us discover what it is that you want us to do. And then secondly, I ask that for those of us who are followers of you already, that you would expand our faith and that you would help us to figure out how do you want us to engage in those ways, and that you would help us to lean into it. And so, Father, I pray that you would speak to us in the most tangible way, and that you would help us to see what you'd have us to do. And then for the people in the room that are not followers of you, or the people in the room who maybe even want to be generous, but they're not sure if they trust the church yet, God, I pray that you would give them the courage to apply this, even if it's not here, and that they would still be generous, even if it's in a different place. And I pray that it would be an undeniable sense of the way that you interacted with their lives from there, where they look and say that you got involved, even if they're not sure how. So I pray that you would inspire them to give, even if it's not this place, even though I think this is the best place to give. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being here. We love you guys. We'll see you right back here next Sunday. We'll be right back here next Sunday. Eat a lot at Thanksgiving, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.